Imagine a 45-year-old man who, for 2 decades, sacrificed holidays, dinners, and leisure moments with a single goal: to destroy his home debt. He finally signs the last check for $42,000, feels the weight of the world lift from his shoulders, and believes that now the American dream is finally his. That night, he sleeps with the peace of someone who owns the roof over his head, not realizing he has just immobilized his most valuable army in a brick structure that cannot be spent. 6 months later, the market shifts. The company where he had worked for 10 years announces massive layoffs, and he finds himself without a salary. He looks at his paid-off house and realizes a brutal truth. Walls cannot be eaten, and banks don't make loans to people without income. He's in a liquidity trap, where he owns immense wealth but doesn't have $1,000 to pay for health insurance or the electric bill. The security he bought with so much sweat has become a concrete prison that prevents him from reacting to chaos. This is the great lie I notice being sold as the pinnacle of financial wisdom: the idea that trapped equity equals security. I'm Buck, and I see this scene repeat constantly with brilliant people who confuse the emotional relief of not having a bill with the rational strategy of having available capital. The problem isn't the house, but what you sacrifice to own it completely before the right time. Let's understand why having a paid-off house can actually be the most dangerous move you can make against your own sovereignty. I, Buck, spend my days analyzing the emotional lies that the system and our own minds tell us about money and power. My purpose here is to dissect these narratives and show you how the pursuit of social approval and irrational fear are often the greatest enemies of your real wealth. If you seek a vision that goes beyond spreadsheets and dives into the psychology of freedom, you're in the right place. And I invite you to subscribe and leave your like to strengthen this community of independent minds. In this process, I use what I call the wise observer. For those just joining us, this is my practice of stepping back from daily confusion to analyze the invisible patterns that govern our financial choices. It's the ability to see the shadow of our decisions, perceiving what truly motivates our behavior beyond the logical justifications we create for ourselves. Today, my goal is to slaughter one of the middle class's most sacred cows: mortgage payoff. I promise you that by the end of this conversation, you'll have a completely new perspective on what it means to be secure. We're going to break the debt taboo and understand how the rich use leverage while the middle class hands over all their financial oxygen to banking institutions in exchange for a property title. Prepare for a mathematical and psychological reality shock that can permanently change the trajectory of your wealth building and your perception of risk. The early payoff movement is based almost entirely on an emotional response to fear, and rarely on a cold mathematical analysis of current reality. I notice that most people who preach live debt-free are stuck in a historical context of past decades when mortgage interest rates reached 15% or 18%. In that scenario, paying off the house was a survival necessity, but applying that same logic today, with fixed rates of 3% to 5%, is a strategic error that costs millions of dollars over a lifetime. Paying off your mortgage early in a low-interest scenario is, in practice, the same as taking your hard-earned capital and investing it in a very low-yield savings account. You're handing over dollars that could be working for you in the market and locking them in a structure that generates no cash flow and still generates maintenance expenses and taxes. I call this the fear tax, where you pay an extremely high premium just to silence the anxiety of having a monthly bill, sacrificing your future growth for present psychological comfort. I observe that the system loves when you decide to pay off your house, because you remove the risk from their hands and place all the weight on your shoulders. While you have a mortgage, the bank is your partner in real estate risk. When you pay it off, you assume alone any neighborhood devaluation or natural disaster. Sovereignty requires that you understand the difference between a debt that consumes you and a debt that acts as a subsidy for your freedom. Let's stop deciding with our stomach and start deciding with the vision of someone who governs their own capital strategically. To understand how the truly wealthy get rich, you need to comprehend how banks operate. They live off the spread. That is, the difference between what they pay to capture money and what they charge to lend it. The sovereign strategy is to reverse this game in your favor through arbitrage, borrowing cheaply through a mortgage and investing that same capital in assets that yield much more. If the bank lends you $100,000 at a 4% rate, and you can invest that amount with an 8% return, you've just put $4,000 of pure profit in your pocket every year. I notice that the middle class has a terror of this logic because they focus only on the debt value, while the sophisticated investor focuses on capital efficiency. When you maintain a low-cost mortgage, you're essentially hiring the bank's money to be your most productive and tireless employee. This invested capital generates compound interest that, over 20 or 30 years, creates a wealth difference that a paid-off house could never achieve. It's the difference between having a brick trophy or an army of dollars working for your total independence. Imagine having $100,000 sitting inside your house walls, or having those same $100,000 earning dividends and appreciation in a diversified index fund. In the first scenario, your money is dead and inaccessible. In the second, it's a source of oxygen that can cover your expenses and still leave room for new contributions. Arbitrage isn't a magic trick. It's the basic tool of financial sovereignty that allows you to use the system in your favor instead of being just the fuel that keeps the bank's gears turning. The traditional risk they teach us is that of owing money, but I, Buck, notice that the real and silent risk is liquidity risk. That is, the lack of immediate access to your capital when you need it most. The concept of dead equity is exactly what happens when you pay off your house. You have wealth, but it's static and useless for solving short-term emergencies. In a crisis, the man with a paid-off house and zero in the bank is in a much more vulnerable position than the man with a $2,000 mortgage and $500,000 in liquid investments. The myth of paid-off house security crumbles the moment you realize that your house still requires payments for taxes, insurance, and heavy maintenance to keep from rotting. If you can't pay property taxes or insurance, the government or the system can still take your roof, regardless of whether you have an active mortgage or not. Invested in liquid money guarantees much more real security, as it can pay the mortgage, taxes, and all other bills in your life for years on end, while the paid-off house just sits there, looking at you while bills accumulate. Buck observes that true peace of mind doesn't come from having zero on the debt balance, but from having absolute control over the options that available capital provides. When you lock your money in real estate, you hand over your options to the real estate market and refinancing banking bureaucracies. Financial sovereignty requires that you keep your capital where it can be mobilized with speed and intelligence. Don't confuse the solidity of walls with the solidity of your future. Walls can fall, but a well-executed liquidity strategy keeps you standing in any storm. Inflation is often seen as the great enemy of the saver, but I notice that it's the best friend of the strategic debtor who owns a long-term fixed-rate mortgage. When you owe $100,000 today, and inflation erodes the currency's value over 20 years, you're paying your debt with cheap dollars in the future. If your monthly payment is $2,000 today, in 2045, those same $2,000 will represent a much smaller slice of your purchasing power and income. By paying off the house now, you're returning expensive dollars to the bank and giving up this incredible temporal advantage. A fixed-rate mortgage is actually one of the best inflation hedges that an ordinary citizen can access in the United States. The bank assumes the risk that the money it will receive from you in the future will be worth much less than it's worth today, while you lock in your housing costs for decades. When you accelerate payoff, you're voluntarily destroying this protective shield and handing over your liquidity in exchange for an asset that inflation will also make more expensive in terms of maintenance and taxes. Buck notes that the conscious debtor uses time as an ally to dilute the weight of their financial obligation. Sovereignty requires that you understand the changing nature of money's value over decades and not be fooled by the nominal value of debt. Paying a 3% interest debt when inflation is at 4% or 5% means that in real terms, the bank is paying you to owe them money. It's a massive wealth transfer from creditor to debtor that most people ignore because of a moral taboo against debt. Use inflation in your favor, keep your dollars working in real assets, and let time take care of transforming your mortgage into an insignificant expense in your future budget. Let's do a simple simulation that I notice most people avoid because the result is a reality shock to the ego of those who want to pay off the house. If you take an extra $1,000 monthly and use them to pay off a 15-year mortgage early, you'll save some thousands of dollars in interest and have the house paid off sooner. However, if you invest those same $1,000 monthly in the S&P 500 during the same period, the final result after 30 years can be a difference of more than $1 million in your total net worth. This brutal difference is what I call the price of poorly planned peace of mind, an invisible cost that can cost your total freedom in old age. Paying off the house gives you immediate psychological relief, but investing the capital gives you the sovereignty of being a millionaire with unlimited options. Buck observes that people often overestimate the house interest savings and drastically underestimate the power of compound interest in productive investments. You're trading the chance to have an army of dollars for a brick trophy that doesn't multiply itself. The decision to pay off the house early is often a declaration that you don't trust your own ability to invest or the market's long-term resilience. It's a defensive move that ignores the offensive necessary to build wealth that truly changes your lineage's level. Financial sovereignty requires that you be an intelligent capital allocator, always seeking the highest risk-adjusted return for every dollar that passes through your hands. Don't let the pursuit of short-term peace destroy the opportunity to build a legacy that guarantees peace for all generations that will come after you. There's a psychological law that I notice profoundly affects those who decide to pay off their mortgage too early. It says that your expenses tend to increase to fill all the money you have available after paying basic bills. When a family pays off the house and the $3,000 monthly payment disappears, the human tendency is not to invest that amount, but rather to increase their standard of living, more expensive trips, new cars, and luxury dinners. The paid-off house ends up becoming an invitation to rampant consumption and the loss of financial discipline. In this sense, the mortgage acts as a form of forced savings discipline for the middle class, forcing you to allocate part of your income to wealth building every month. Without this mandatory commitment, your less disciplined self takes control and spends the surplus on immediate gratifications that don't build sovereignty. Buck notes that maintaining the mortgage payment and automatically investing the surplus creates a healthy psychological barrier against lifestyle inflation. You learn to live with less while your army of investments grows silently in the background. Sovereignty requires that you know your own weaknesses and create systems that protect you from yourself and your consumption impulses. For many, the mortgage is the anchor that maintains household budget stability, preventing the ego from feeling too rich and starting to waste accumulated capital. Use structured debt as a personal governance tool, ensuring you continue working and saving with the same intensity as when you were starting out. Lifestyle control is the secret of the invisible rich, and the long-term mortgage is one of the best tools to keep this discipline intact for decades. A dark aspect I notice about total real estate ownership is that a paid-off house is a bright and exposed target for any lawsuit or litigation. In the United States, we live in a lawsuit culture, and bad faith lawyers look for assets with clean equity to attack in case of car accidents or business disputes. When you have a high mortgage, the house has little immediate liquid value for a creditor, making you a much less attractive target for legal predators. Debt acts as a patrimonial protection shield that discourages attacks against your roof. Sovereignty requires that you learn the art of appearing poor on paper while being secretly rich in investment accounts and protected trusts. Keeping your wealth hidden in liquid financial assets is much safer than displaying it in a public deed of a debt-free house that anyone can consult. Buck observes that the most sophisticated individuals prefer to have control of many assets through structured debts than total ownership of few exposed assets. Invisibility is your best defense against social envy and institutional greed that punish those who obviously display success. Strategically, it's much smarter to keep your wealth in brokerage accounts that have specific protections against creditors in many states, instead of burying it in bricks that can be confiscated in a court sentence. The paid off house attracts unwanted attention and creates a vulnerability that most people don't even imagine until the lawsuit arrives by mail. Protect your sovereignty by staying strategic and discreet. Use the mortgage to keep your capital mobile and protected, ensuring your roof remains safe not because you paid for it, but because it's not worth stealing. The rules of the financial game changed in 2025, and I noticed that the middle class is still playing with manuals from 10 years ago, ignoring the new realities of tax deductions. With the increase in standard deduction, the direct advantage of deducting mortgage interest decreased for many. But for those who own an investment portfolio, the debt math still offers powerful indirect benefits. When you maintain the mortgage and invest the capital, you're creating an implicit government subsidy, where the real cost of your debt is reduced by the appreciation of your assets in accounts with tax benefits like the 401k or IRA. Sovereignty requires that you understand how the tax code incentivizes the use of productive debt while penalizing the accumulation of static and unproductive wealth. By maintaining the mortgage, you maintain the liquidity necessary to take advantage of retirement contribution deductions and other incentives that reduce your global tax burden. Buck notes that paying off the house is a final act that ends any possibility of tax optimization related to that asset, while maintaining the debt gives you flexibility to adjust your strategy year after year. The government and banks want you to be a responsible debtor, and they create incentive trails for those who know how to use credit in their favor. Calculating your effective interest rate after tax implications and inflation often reveals that your mortgage is the cheapest form of capital you'll ever have access to in life. It's a gross error to give up this resource just to see the number 0 on your monthly statement, while you lose optimization opportunities that the rich use every day to protect their capital. Financial sovereignty isn't about not paying interest. It's about ensuring that your capital return is always superior to your debt cost. Use Buck's vision to see through the surface of taxes and find the structure that best protects and multiplies your sovereign wealth. I know many of you are thinking, but what if the stock market falls 40% next year? Wouldn't I be safer with a paid-off house? This concern about market risk is valid, but I noticed that the solution isn't to immobilize capital in real estate, but rather to maintain a robust liquidity buffer in low-risk assets. Sovereignty doesn't come from the absence of debt, but from the abundance of reserves that allow you to navigate any market downturn without needing to sell your assets at the bottom. Fear of the market is often just a reflection of the lack of an adequate risk management strategy. The concept of synthetic return that I use shows that by keeping money invested, you're generating the income necessary to pay your mortgage, creating a house that pays for itself while you maintain control of the original capital. If you pay off the house, you surrender control. If you invest the money, you maintain the sovereignty to decide what to do with it at any time. Buck observes that true financial independence isn't the absence of bills to pay, but the possession of an income-generating system that makes those bills irrelevant to your lifestyle. Surrendering control is the greatest danger of paying off the house early. Once the money enters the walls, it belongs to the bank and the real estate market until you sell the property or get a new loan, which may be impossible in a financial crisis. Maintain your sovereignty by keeping your capital where it can be seen and moved by you. True security is liquidity, and true freedom is the ability to choose how to react to world fluctuations without being tied to an illiquid and heavy asset like the real estate market. Of course, Buck, noticed that there are specific situations where paying off the house makes absolute sense, especially when new interest rates are at prohibitive levels of 8% or 9%. If your debt cost is higher than the expected and safe return you can get in the market, the arbitrage reverses and you're losing money every month. In these cases, payoff becomes a guaranteed fixed income investment with a return equal to the interest rate you stopped paying. Sovereignty requires that you be pragmatic and not cling to dogmas when numbers change drastically. Another important exception is people who have an extremely undisciplined psychological profile, what I call the chronic spender persona. If you know that by not paying the extra mortgage, you'll spend the money on futile trips, electronics, and status consumption, then paying off the house is the lesser of evils for you. In this case, the paid off house acts as a safety vault against your own inability to manage capital. Buck notes that for some profiles, the rigidity of real estate wealth is the only thing preventing total bankruptcy before retirement. However, for the wise observer seeking real sovereignty, these exceptions are just reminders of the importance of self-knowledge and strategic discipline. If you're capable of automating your investments and keeping your lifestyle under control, early payoff will rarely be your best path. The general rule of stealth wealth is to keep productive capital and cheap debt under your command. Honestly assess which profile you fit into before making a decision that can cost decades of growth and millions of dollars in lost freedom. We need to break the idea that debt is a sin or a sign of failure. In fact, structured debt is the most powerful wealth creation tool the American system offers. I notice that governments, large companies, and the world's wealthiest families constantly use debt to leverage their results and protect their liquidity. The middle-class teaching about living debt-free is designed to create docile workers who have no leverage and who hand over all their surplus to banks as quickly as possible. Sovereignty requires that you change your mindset from credit consumer to capital strategist. The danger of zero is that when you have no debt, you also have no leverage, and consequently, fewer reaction options in the face of world changes. A balance sheet with zero debt is a static and overly defensive balance for an economic environment that rewards mobility and growth. Buck observes that the rich don't want to own everything. They want to control everything with the minimum possible exposure of their own capital. This is the essence of sovereignty, using the system's resources to build your own independence without becoming a slave to the obligations you assume. Change your vision and see your mortgage as a low-cost partner that allows you to maintain possession of your time and your army of investments. By accepting debt as a strategic tool, you free yourself from the moral weight that society imposes and start playing the money game at the same level as the big Wall Street players. Don't be afraid to owe the bank if what you own yields more than what you owe. Be afraid of being the man who handed over all his capital to the bank and now has no chips to play when opportunity knocks at your door. If you want to apply Buck's vision today and start building your real sovereignty, the first practical step is to immediately stop any extra payment you're making on your low-interest mortgage. That extra money isn't saving anything for you, it's just being buried in infertile soil where it can't grow. Take that monthly amount and open a dedicated brokerage account, which I call your Freedom Fund, and automate the contribution so it happens before any other expense in your life. The second step is to direct that capital to diversified index funds, like the S&P 500, which historically offer returns much superior to any residential mortgage rate. By doing this, you're creating a debt mirror, where your invested wealth will grow much faster than your mortgage balance decreases. In 10 years, you'll be able to look at that account and realize that the accumulated value is enough to pay off the house twice, if you really want to, but you'll have the sovereignty to choose not to do it and let the money continue working. This discipline of transferring focus from house payment to liquid asset accumulation is what forges the character of a true destiny architect. Buck observes that the consistency of this habit is more important than the initial amount, as it reprograms your brain to seek multiplication instead of simple bill elimination. Start small, but start today, and observe how your perception of security changes as your wall of invested capital grows. Freedom isn't the absence of a mortgage bill, it's the presence of a massive portfolio that makes any bill irrelevant to your peace of mind. We've reached the end of this autopsy of one of our financial culture's most limiting beliefs, and I hope you now see the abysmal difference between having a paid-off house and having a sovereign life. The choice between a massive portfolio and a paid-off house is the choice between having an army of dollars fighting for you or having a brick trophy that only consumes your oxygen. Use the wise observer's vision to protect your territory, maintain your liquidity, and never surrender control of your destiny to fear or to the expectations of the masses living on the edge. If this perspective made sense to you and you wish to continue training your eye to see what most ignore, I invite you to follow this channel and become part of this sovereignty circle. Leave your comment below. Do you prefer the immediate peace of a paid-off roof or the strategic strength of liquid capital? I want to know what stage of your journey you're at. Your interaction is what keeps this independent thinking space resilient against the system's noise and ensures we continue pioneering the truth. Finally, don't keep this vision just to yourself. If you have friends or family members who are sacrificing the present and real security to feed this sacred cow of early payoff, share this video with them right now. Helping those you love see the liquidity trap is a real act of protection for your lineage and for the future of people who matter to you. Thank you for trusting my vision and for allowing Buck's voice to be part of building your personal empire. Keep your numbers clear and your soul free. See you in the next chapter.